she's still eating off paper plates while sitting on a $94 million fortune? My stepmother's voice sliced through the dining room like a carving knife through turkey breast. Richard, your daughter is 32 and still begging for handouts. Some people just aren't meant for the Mitchell family standards. I watched 23 relatives freeze mid-bite as Dad slowly stood, his Patek Philippe catching the light from the chandelier that cost more than most people's cars. The same chandelier I'd helped him pick out when I was 12, back when he still called me his little CEO. Back when Mom was alive and our Thanksgivings smelled like her rosemary stuffing instead of Jessica's store-bought shame. Get out, Sarah. The words fell from his mouth like ice cubes into an empty glass. I'm tired of defending you to this family. Tired of making excuses for why my eldest daughter is still nothing. The word nothing hung in the air between us, heavy as the silence that followed. My cousin Derek actually had his phone out, probably live streaming this to his Instagram story. My younger sister Madison, Jessica's biological daughter, the one who'd inherited my childhood bedroom, smirked behind her wine glass. The wine I'd brought, actually. A 2015 Chateau Margaux I'd been saving for a special occasion. Funny how your own funeral can qualify as special. Dad, I started, but Jessica cut me off with a laugh that sounded like champagne flutes breaking. Oh, please don't do the wounded daughter act again. We've seen this performance before. Last year it was the failed startup. The year before that, the unpaid internship at 30. Face it, sweetheart. Some people peak in high school. You peaked in your mother's womb. I felt the notification buzz in my pocket. The 7th one in the last hour. Each buzz worth approximately $13 million. But I kept my hands steady on the table, watching the cranberry sauce congeal on my untouched plate. 3 hours ago, Chen Industries, my company, built under my mother's maiden name, had closed the Series C funding round that would make me one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the country. The wire transfer confirmations kept coming, each one a digital slap to the face of everyone at this table. But they didn't know that. They knew Sarah Mitchell, the family disappointment. They didn't know Sarah Chen, the woman who'd just revolutionized AI-powered logistics, while they were arguing about who brought the wrong brand of butter. You're right, I said quietly, standing with the kind of careful grace my mother had taught me before cancer took her voice, but not her lessons. I should go. Finally, some sense, Jessica muttered, already eyeing my chair like she'd been waiting to repurpose it. Probably for one of her Hermes bags, the fake ones she thought nobody noticed. I picked up my coat, the same black wool peacoat I'd worn since college, the one Jessica always said made me look like I was cosplaying success. My hands didn't shake as I buttoned it. My voice didn't waver as I looked my father in the eye. The man who'd once taught me to read stock tickers at age 7, who'd promised me the world would be mine if I just worked hard enough. Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. I hope the turkey isn't as dry as your affection. The walk to the door felt like a runway, 23 pairs of eyes boring into my back. 23 people who'd just witnessed my execution and were already moving on to dessert. But as my hand touched the doorknob, Aunt Patricia, sweet, gossipy Aunt Patricia, who lived for family drama, called out, "Sarah, dear, what's that Chen Industries everyone's talking about? Someone said they saw the name in TechCrunch. Isn't Chen your mother's?" "Nothing important," I said, not turning around. "Just another one of my failures, I'm sure." The November air hit my face like a benediction. Behind me, I heard Jessica's voice, sharp with suspicion. "Richard, why is she smiling?" I was smiling. For the first time in 5 Thanksgivings, I was smiling. Because tomorrow morning, while they were nursing their wine hangovers and leftover turkey sandwiches, the Wall Street Journal would run a front-page story about Chen Industries' record-breaking funding round. My photo would be there, professional and polished, with a headline they'd choke on: "The Invisible Heiress, How Sarah Chen Built a $94 million Empire in Silence." But tonight I sat in my Tesla, watching their shadows move behind the windows of the house I'd grown up in. The house where my mother's piano still sat untouched in the corner because Jessica thought it clashed with her aesthetic. I pulled out my phone and looked at the wire transfer confirmations again. $94 million. Enough to buy this entire neighborhood. Enough to make their country club dues look like pocket change. I typed a message to my CFO. "Martha, about that acquisition we discussed, the one involving Mitchell Imports, make it happen, full hostile takeover. And Martha, make sure the paperwork lands on his desk Monday morning." As I drove away, leaving their warm lights in my rearview mirror, I thought about what Jessica had said about peeking in the womb. She was wrong, of course, but she was also right in a way she'd never understand. I had peeked in my mother's womb, because that's where I'd learned my first lesson in patience, in growing quietly in the dark, in emerging when the time was right. My mother had given me her name, her features, and apparently, her gift for revenge, served colder than their leftover turkey would ever be. Sometimes the best seat at the table is the one you build yourself, in a different house, in a different world, with a different name they never thought to Google. I wasn't always invisible. There are photos to prove it, buried now in boxes, Jessica relegated to the basement for storage. Photos of a little girl with her father's eyes and her mother's smile, sitting on his shoulders at company picnics, tiny hands wrapped around his fingers as he taught me to write my first business plan at age 8. "Sarah's Lemonade Empire," he'd titled it, laminating the crayon-covered pages like they were contracts worth millions. Funny how prophetic that turned out to be. The erasure started slowly, like fog creeping across a mirror. First, it was small things after Mom died. My piano recital recordings disappeared from the living room shelf. My academic awards migrated from the main hallway to the guest bathroom. My mother's photos gradually vanished, replaced by Jessica's interior design magazines and Madison's participation trophies. "We need to move forward," Dad had said, 6 months after Mom's funeral, Jessica's engagement ring already glinting on her finger. "Your mother would want us to be happy." My mother would have wanted a lot of things, like for her daughter to have access to the trust fund she'd carefully set aside, like for her husband to remember that she existed for more than the 17 years they'd shared, like for someone, anyone, to notice that her 12-year-old daughter had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped believing that good grades and perfect behavior could bring back the dead. But Jessica noticed something else entirely. She noticed that I had my mother's bone structure, her grace, her way of commanding attention without trying. And Jessica, former Miss South Carolina runner-up, current trophy wife extraordinaire, decided that one beauty in the family was enough. "Sarah's going through an awkward phase," she'd tell anyone who'd listen, usually while Madison posed in another pageant dress. Thank God she's smart. She'll need it. The narrative solidified like cement. Sarah, the smart one. Madison, the pretty one. Sarah, MIT scholarship, dismissed as diversity quotas by Jessica. Madison, Instagram influencer, celebrated like a Nobel Prize. Sarah, first patent at 25. Madison, first DUI at 21. Swept under the rug with daddy's money and Jessica's connections. I became a ghost story told in my own home. Did you know Richard has another daughter? Guests would whisper at parties, like I was a shameful secret, instead of a human being eating canapés in the corner. Jessica perfected the art of introduction. This is Madison, our daughter, and Sarah, Richard's daughter from before. Before, like my entire existence, was just a prelude to Jessica's main act. The trust fund betrayal came during my junior year at MIT. I'd been living on ramen and determination, tutoring calculus to make rent, when I finally asked Dad about the money Mom had left me. "Oh, sweetheart," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. The market crashed, bad investments. Jessica's financial advisor tried his best, but... Jessica's financial advisor, Jessica's Maserati, purchased that same year. Jessica's sudden interest in my mother's jewelry, the pieces that were supposed to be mine on my 21st birthday. I did the math. It wasn't hard. Mom had left me $2 million. Enough for school, for startup capital, for a life she'd never get to see me build. I found the receipts later, during Christmas break, when everyone was at Jessica's sister's house, and I was too busy with schoolwork to join. Receipts for Madison's college tuition, the one she'd drop out of after 2 semesters. Receipts for Jessica's boutique, the one that would fail within a year. Receipts for vacations I was never invited on, charged to an account that still had my mother's name on it. I confronted him once. Only once. "You stole from me. Sarah, don't be dramatic. Family shares resources. Family includes me. Of course it does, but Madison needed my money?" The silence that followed told me everything. Madison needed, and therefore Madison received. Sarah had scholarships, and therefore Sarah could survive. The equation was that simple in their minds. I stopped going home for holidays after that. Too busy, I'd say, spending Thanksgivings in empty dorm rooms and Christmases in 24-hour libraries. But I wasn't just busy, I was building. Every rejection letter became code. Every locked door became a blueprint. Every Sarah's not really family became another reason to prove that family was just a word, and words could be rewritten. The last time I'd tried, really tried, was at Madison's college graduation party. The one for the degree she'd bought with my mother's money and barely earned with her father's connections. I'd shown up with flowers, wearing my best dress, hoping that maybe success would translate to visibility. "Oh, you came," Jessica had said, air kissing past my cheek. "How nice. Madison, Sarah's here. You remember Sarah?" My sister, half-sister, as Jessica always corrected, had looked through me like I was furniture. "Oh, hi, did you see my car outside? Daddy bought it for graduation. It's the new Tesla Model S." I'd driven there in my 2010 Honda Civic, held together by duct tape and determination. But underneath the hood of my laptop, I was building something that would make her Tesla look like a toy. They just didn't know it yet. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never again beg for scraps from their table. I would never again dim my light to make their shadows feel bigger. I would build something so undeniable, so magnificent, that their erasure of me would become the most embarrassing footnote in their own story. "You know what your problem is," Jessica had said that night. "Wine-drunk and cruel. You remind Richard of her, and nobody wants to be reminded of the dead." She was wrong. I didn't remind him of Mom. I had become her, evolved, refined, and armed with something Mom never had. The benefit of knowing exactly who these people were. Mom had loved blindly. I would succeed with my eyes wide open. But Jessica was right about one thing. Nobody wanted to be reminded of the dead, which is why I buried Sarah Mitchell that night, in that driveway, surrounded by graduation balloons for a daughter who'd spent my inheritance on Instagram likes. Sarah Chen was born in that burial, and Sarah Chen didn't need their recognition. She would build an empire so vast that one day their ignorance of her would be the only thing anyone remembered about them. I learned that being forgotten isn't a curse when you're building something unforgettable. Invisibility is just another word for underestimated, and there's no better foundation for an empire than the blindness of those who should have seen you coming. The wedding was perfect, if you liked your perfection, served with a side of suffocation. My cousin Amelia's intimate ceremony for 300 of her closest friends, held at the Ritz-Carlton, with orchids flown in from Thailand and a cake that cost more than my annual rent. I'd driven 5 hours to be there, sleeping in my car at rest stops to save on hotel money, arriving with carefully pressed clothes and a gift I couldn't afford, but bought anyway, because family, as they love to remind me, was everything. I should have known better when Jessica assigned the seating. Table 27, the purgatory section where distant relatives and plus ones went to be forgotten. I sat between Great Aunt Mildred, who spent the entire cocktail hour asking why I wasn't married yet, and someone's accountant, who kept checking his phone and sighing. Meanwhile, Madison held court at table 2, regaling the bridal party with stories about her influence journey and the brand deal she'd just signed with a detox tea company. But I had news too, real news, the kind that should have mattered to a family that claimed to value success. "I just closed my first major client," I told the accountant, desperate to share with someone, anyone. "It's a logistics company, and they're implementing my AI system." Sarah. My father's voice cut through my sentence like a guillotine through hope. He stood behind me, champagne flute in hand, disapproval radiating from every pore. "Please, today's about family success stories." The accountant suddenly found his phone fascinating. Great Aunt Mildred discovered an urgent need to powder her nose. And I sat there, words dying in my throat, watching my father walk away to join table 1, where Jessica was holding Madison's phone to show off her latest sponsored post to the bride's parents. 50,000 followers, I heard him boast. Our Madison's really making something of herself. It's all about having the right connections, the right look. She gets that from her mother. The right look, the right connections. Not the right code that could revolutionize how Fortune 500 companies moved their products. Not the right algorithm that could save millions in shipping costs. Not the right mind that had just solved a problem the industry had been grappling with for years. The music swelled. Couples moved to the dance floor, and I sat at table 27, watching my father dance with Jessica, watching Madison pose for selfies with the bride, watching a family celebrate everything except the daughter who'd just changed an industry. The DJ played Isn't She Lovely, Madison's favorite song, because of course it was. I left during the father-daughter dance. Nobody noticed. The drive back to my apartment was 5 hours of clarity disguised as highway. 5 hours of watching headlights blur through tears I refused to acknowledge. 5 hours of replaying every dismissal, every interruption, every "please, Sarah, not now," that had shaped my existence. My apartment greeted me with its familiar chorus of problems. The AC that rattled like a dying animal, the faucet that dripped in Morse code, the walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's TV playing infomercials for products that promised to change your life in 3 easy payments. I sat on my mattress on the floor. Bed frames were for people whose fathers didn't steal their trust funds, and opened my laptop. The contract was there, waiting, my first major client. The money would be enough to fix the AC, buy furniture, maybe even start saving. But staring at that screen, at my name on a legal document worth more than Madison's entire influencer career, I realized something. I was still thinking too small. "Today's about family success stories," he'd said. Like my success wasn't family. Like I wasn't family. Fine. If I wasn't family, I didn't need to play by family rules. If my achievements were interruptions, I'd stop announcing them. If my presence was an embarrassment, I'd become an absence they'd never forget. I pulled up the incorporation documents I'd been hesitating over for months. The name field blinked at me, cursor patient. Sarah Mitchell, the interrupted daughter? Or someone else, someone new? My fingers moved without conscious thought. Sarah Chen. My mother's name. The name they'd erased from everything except legal documents they'd forgotten existed. The name that meant morning in Mandarin, because my grandmother had believed in new beginnings. Sarah Chen, CEO of Chen Industries. It sounded like armor. It sounded like war. I worked through the night, fueled by rage refined into focus. I incorporated the company. I set up bank accounts they'd never trace. I reached out to contacts who knew my work, not my lineage. By sunrise, Sarah Mitchell's greatest achievement had become Sarah Chen's starting point. The eviction notice on my door that morning, late rent again, didn't break me. It liberated me. Can't afford this apartment? Fine. I'd live in my car and use the library's Wi-Fi. Can't afford meals? Fine. Hunger was just another word for drive. Can't afford to fail? Perfect. Failure was for people who had safety nets, and thanks to them, I'd never have one. "You're crazy," my college roommate said when I told her my plan. "You're going to build a tech empire while homeless?" "I'm not homeless," I corrected. "I'm mobile, and I'm not crazy. I'm motivated." The difference mattered. Crazy was emotional. Motivated was strategic. And I'd spent my entire life being emotional, begging for crumbs of affection from people who'd made it clear I was an inconvenience they'd inherited. No more. Every rejection email became code. Every no from investors became a not yet. Every night in my car became a reminder that rock bottom was just another foundation to build on. I named my first algorithm Jessica. Just every single successful investment calculation algorithm. Petty, maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Because every time I wanted to quit, every time the hunger or exhaustion or loneliness threatened to break me, I remembered that wedding, that interruption, that dismissal of everything I'd worked for because it didn't come with the right last name or the right shade of lipstick. I didn't need their approval, I told my reflection in the gym mirror at the 24-hour fitness where I showered. I needed their abandonment. How else would I have learned to build something they could never take away? 3 months later, When my first algorithm saved a Fortune 500 company $3.7 million in shipping costs, the CEO asked how I developed such innovative thinking. Necessity, I told him, and spite, but mostly spite refined into excellence. He laughed, thinking I was joking. I let him think that. The truth was too personal to share, that the greatest gift my family ever gave me was their cruelty, crystallized into ambition. They'd taught me that love was conditional, but success was mine to define. And I was going to define it in numbers so large, they'd need a new table just to count them. The turning point isn't when you realize they don't love you. It's when you realize that their love was never the goal. The goal was becoming someone who didn't need their love to be whole. And that person, she was born in a Ritz-Carlton parking lot, crying in a Honda Civic, incorporated under a dead woman's name. 3 years, 1,095 days of invisibility weaponized into empire building. That's what it took to transform a woman living in her Honda Civic into someone who could buy the entire parking lot where she used to sleep. The garage I rented for my first office was in Chinatown, wedged between a dim sum restaurant and a textile shop that had been there since the 1960s. Rent was $400 a month, cash only, no questions asked. The owner, Mrs. Liu, took one look at me hauling in salvaged computers at 2 a.m. and said in Mandarin, "You remind me of myself, 40 years ago, hungry." I was hungry and starving, actually. For success, for vindication, for the day when Chen Industries would be more than just angry code, written between food service shifts. But mostly, I was hungry because ramen twice a day was all I could afford while pouring every penny into server costs. My first employee found me the way all desperate people find each other, recognizing the same exhaustion dressed up as determination. Priya Sharma, brilliant programmer, had just been passed over for promotion for the 3rd time at Google. They said I wasn't leadership material, she told me over coffee. I couldn't afford, but bought anyway. Too aggressive, not collaborative enough. Perfect, I said. I need aggressive. Collaborative is for people who can afford to share credit. We called ourselves the Invisibles. Every woman who joined us had the same story. Overlooked, underestimated, told they were too much or not enough. We worked 18-hour days in that garage, fueled by spite and Mrs. Liu's leftover dumplings. Our business cards, when we could finally afford them, listed our titles as formerly underestimated. The breakthrough came 18 months in. Priya had cracked the code on predictive logistics modeling, while I'd developed an AI that could optimize shipping routes in real time. Together, we'd created something that could save companies millions. The Fortune 500 would eat this up. But here's the beautiful thing about revenge served cold. It requires patience and the right temperature. My father's import business, Mitchell Imports, was hemorrhaging money. I knew because I'd made it my business to know. Public records are beautiful things when you know where to look. They were losing contracts to some new tech startup that could deliver goods 30% faster at 20% less cost. 3 guesses who that startup was. Chen Industries came out of nowhere. I heard him complain at a family dinner I learned about through Madison's Instagram. Nobody knows who runs it. They're undercutting everyone, revolutionizing everything. It's not sustainable. Oh, but it was, because while he was paying for Jessica's 3rd Mercedes and Madison's 4th attempt at being an influencer, I was reinvesting every dollar into growth, While they were drinking champagne at the country club, I was sleeping on the office floor to save on rent. While they were planning vacations to houses they'd soon lose, I was planning their financial obituary. By year 2, we'd moved to a real office, still in Chinatown because I developed a fondness for Mrs. Liu's dumplings and her occasional wisdom. Success is like tea, she told me once. Bitter at first, but satisfying once you acquire the taste. We had 15 employees, all women who'd been told they weren't enough. Our client list read like a who's who of American commerce, and Mitchell Imports, they'd lost 40% of their business. To us, to me, to the daughter who wasn't a family success story. The holding company acquisition was almost too easy. Cascade Holdings owned the mortgage on my father's house, along with several other properties in their neighborhood. It was struggling, bleeding money from bad investments. The owner wanted out. I wanted in. Why this company? Priya asked when I showed her the proposal. There are better investments. ROI isn't always measured in money, I told her, signing the papers with my mother's Mont Blanc pen, the one thing I'd managed to save from Jessica's greed. Sometimes it's measured in poetic justice. I became their landlord on a Tuesday. It was raining, which felt appropriate. The letters went out on Wednesday, professionally worded notices about new ownership, signed by Chen, CEO. They'd never suspect. Why would they? Sarah Mitchell was a failure living off relatives' charity. Sarah Chen was a name on letterhead, running an empire from the shadows. The country club membership lapsed first. Then Jessica's boutiques started closing, 1, then 2, then all of them. Madison's influencer career dried up when the money for buying followers ran out. The family that had once gathered around mahogany tables now argued over bills in the kitchen. I watched it all from a distance, the way you watch a building demolition, with professional interest and a certain amount of awe at how quickly things can fall when the foundation is rotten. We should send a sympathy card, Priya joked one day, showing me the news that Mitchell Imports had filed for bankruptcy protection. No, I said, looking at our latest numbers. Chen Industries was valued at $47 million and climbing. The best sympathy is success they'll never know is mine. We celebrated our 3rd anniversary with tea in Mrs. Liu's restaurant. 15 employees had become 50. Our garage startup had become 3 floors of prime real estate. And somewhere across the city, my father was probably wondering how he'd lost everything to a ghost company run by someone he'd never meet. You know what's funny? I told Mrs. Liu, who'd become something of a grandmother to our entire company. They spend so much time at that house, in those rooms where they erased me. And now I own the ground beneath their feet. Every mortgage payment is a check written to their biggest failure. Not failure, Mrs. Liu corrected, pouring more tea. Forgotten daughter, there's a difference. Failure implies they remembered you existed. She was right. I wasn't their failure. I was their oversight, their blind spot, their assumption that silence meant surrender instead of strategy. That night, I stood on the roof of our building, looking out at a city full of lights and possibilities. Each light could be a contract. Each building could need our services. Each shadow could hide another invisible woman, ready to join our ranks. My phone buzzed. Another wire transfer, another $1 million contract, another nail in the coffin of Mitchell Imports' legacy. Sarah Mitchell had been erased, but Sarah Chen was writing her name across the skyline in numbers too big to ignore. Power isn't loud. It's the quiet transfer of ownership while they sleep. It's the signature on documents they'll never read. It's building an empire so vast that by the time they realize they're standing in its shadow, the sun has already set on everything they once were. The Business Innovation Awards at the Waldorf Astoria was the kind of event where Silicon Valley met Wall Street, where disruption wore designer suits and innovation came with champagne flutes. I'd been nominated by 3 different board members who'd never met Sarah Chen in person, but had seen her transform their bottom lines. The invitation sat on my desk for weeks before I decided to attend. "You have to go," Priya insisted, holding up the custom gown she'd commissioned for me. "You've hidden long enough. It's time for Sarah Chen to have a face." I wasn't planning on them being there. The universe, however, has a sense of humor darker than my coffee. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving dismissal, there they were. Jessica in a dress 2 sizes too small and 3 years out of style, clutching a knockoff Chanel that she probably thought fooled people. My father in the same suit he'd worn to my mother's funeral, now shiny at the elbows from too much wear. They skulked near the back tables, the ones reserved for staff guests. "Can you believe we have to sit back here?" I heard Jessica hiss. "Just because Tyler works catering doesn't mean we're help." Tyler, Jessica's nephew, the one who'd peaked at fraternity president and now served champagne to the people he used to mock in business school. He looked miserable in his server's uniform, avoiding eye contact with guests who might recognize him from better days. They found their seats at table 47. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sat at table 27 at Amelia's wedding, 20 tables closer to relevance, but still in exile. Now they knew how it felt. The lights dimmed. The host, a former Fortune 500 CEO who'd become a startup evangelist, took the stage. I sat at table 1 between the CEO of a company I'd saved $12 million and a venture capitalist who'd been begging for a meeting for months. My dress, custom made by an actual designer, caught the light like liquid midnight. Ladies and gentlemen, the award for Entrepreneur of the Year goes to someone who's redefined what's possible in logistics technology. Her company's recent $94 million Series C funding round makes her one of the youngest self-made multimillionaires in the country. Please welcome Sarah Chen, founder and CEO of Chen Industries. The spotlight found me before I could process the moment. 94 million. They'd announced the number that had been buzzing in my pocket during that Thanksgiving dinner. The number that made their lifetime of earnings look like a rounding error. I stood, and time did that thing where it becomes honey, thick and golden and slow. The walk to the stage took forever and an instant, but it was long enough to see everything I needed to see. Jessica's champagne glass, frozen halfway to her lips, my father's face, draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. Madison, frantically typing on her phone, probably Googling Sarah Chen, and finding pages of results she'd never thought to look for. Tyler, dropping his serving tray with a crash that nobody noticed because everyone was applauding. The presentation screens lit up with Chen Industries logo, then our client list. Mitchell Imports competitors, Jessica's boutique suppliers, the holding company that owned their mortgage, all of them illuminated in 40-foot projections. While I stood at the podium where my father had once told me I'd never belong. "Thank you," I began, my mother's voice coaching me from memory. Strong, clear, unmistakable. They say success is the best revenge, but I disagree. Success is just success. Revenge is building something so beautiful that the people who doubted you have to watch you receive a standing ovation for it. Laughter rippled through the crowd. They thought it was humble humor. Table 47 knew better. Chen Industries was born in a garage in Chinatown, I continued, finding faces in the crowd who'd believed in me when I had nothing but anger and algorithms. Built by women who were told they were too aggressive, too ambitious, too much. Women who learned that being forgotten by your family just means you're free to reinvent yourself without their limitations. I talked about innovation, about disruption, about the future of AI in logistics. But every word was a love letter to the girl who'd been kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner. Every statistic was a middle finger wrapped in market analytics. Every mention of our unprecedented growth was a reminder that gardens grow best when you salt the earth where your enemies once stood. I want to thank my team, the Invisibles, who proved that the best companies are built by people who were overlooked by worse ones. I want to thank Mrs. Liu, who taught me that success is bitter tea worth acquiring a taste for. And I want to thank everyone who told me I'd never amount to anything. You gave me the most valuable gift an entrepreneur can receive. Absolutely nothing to lose. The standing ovation was thunderous. 400 of the most powerful people in business, on their feet, applauding the woman my family had thrown away like garbage. I couldn't see table 47 anymore. Too many people, standing between us, but I could feel them, the weight of their stares, the pressure of realization. The suffocating moment when you discover that the nothing you discarded was actually everything you'd never have. During dessert, I watched security approach their table. There seemed to be some confusion. Credentials were checked. Guest lists were consulted. Tyler's face went from red to white as he realized staff guests weren't supposed to eat the $1,000 a plate dinner. They were escorted out during my second standing ovation, the one where 3 different Fortune 500 CEOs asked for my card. Jessica's protests echoed faintly over the applause. My husband is Richard Mitchell, Mitchell Imports, we belong here. But Mitchell Imports was bankruptcy paperwork. And Richard Mitchell? He was just a man who'd traded his daughter for a trophy wife, only to discover he'd thrown away the real treasure. Eleanor Koch, the pharmaceutical heiress, leaned over during coffee. Wasn't that Richard Mitchell being escorted out? I heard his company went under. Something about losing contracts to better technology? I wouldn't know, I said, stirring honey into my tea. I don't really keep track of the competition, too busy building the future to catalog the past. It was the kindest cut I could make, to pretend they weren't even worth remembering, to reduce them to footnotes in someone else's success story, to make their public humiliation just another forgettable moment in an unforgettable night. Later, in the ladies' room, I found Madison's Instagram. She'd deleted all the photos from Thanksgiving, all the photos from the last 3 years, actually. Her bio now read, "Building my authentic self." I wondered if she'd ever realize that authenticity can't be built on a foundation of other people's money. But that wasn't my lesson to teach anymore. I had an empire to run. Truth doesn't need announcement. It just needs the right lighting. And sometimes the best spotlight is the one that illuminates everything except the shadows where your former family sits, finally understanding that they're the ones who were never meant for greatness. I found them in the parking garage 40 minutes later, standing beside their decade-old BMW, the one they used to brag about, now sporting a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. The valet had already brought my Tesla around, but I told Marcus, my driver, to wait. Some conversations deserve to happen in parking garages. Fluorescent lights have a way of stripping away pretense, leaving only truth and the echo of expensive shoes on concrete. Sarah, my father's voice cracked on my name like ice under pressure. I mean, Miss Chen. It's still Sarah, I said, keeping 3 feet between us. The distance felt appropriate, close enough to speak, far enough to remind them that proximity was no longer their right. The name never changed, just everything else. Jessica clutched her knockoff purse like a life preserver, her eyes darting between my dress and my car and my calm. She'd spent years reading wealth, and now she was processing mine like a computer crashing on too much data. Why, she finally managed. Why didn't you tell us? All those Thanksgivings, all those times we... She trailed off, probably realizing that finishing that sentence would require admitting to cruelty. All those times you told me I was nothing, I supplied helpfully. All those times you kicked me out, stole my inheritance, gave my room to Madison. Which particular moment of abuse should I have interrupted with, "By the way, I'm building a multi-million-dollar empire"? Madison stood behind them, shrunk into herself in a way I'd never seen. Her phone, usually an extension of her hand, was nowhere in sight. "I Googled you," she whispered. "There are hundreds of articles, Forbes, Fortune, TechCrunch. How did we not know?" "You never looked," I said simply. "Why would you? I was just the forgotten daughter eating off paper plates, remember?" My father aged 10 years in 10 seconds. His shoulders, always so proud, in his Armani suits, crumpled like the bankruptcy papers he'd been signing. The contracts we lost, the suppliers who dropped us, Chen Industries. Every single one. I didn't smile. This wasn't about gloating. This was about truth, served at exactly the right temperature. Did you really think your competitors just got lucky? That the market just naturally evolved away from you? No, Dad. I studied your business model for 3 years. Every weakness, every vulnerability, every client you took for granted, and then I offered them something better. You destroyed us. His voice was hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside and left only the shell. No, I corrected. You destroyed yourselves. I just refused to cushion your fall. Jessica's mask finally cracked. The beauty queen smile, the practiced poise, all of it crumbled into something raw and desperate. What do you want? Money? An apology? What will it take? I don't want anything from you. The words tasted like freedom. That's what you never understood. This was never about what I wanted from you. It was about becoming someone who didn't need anything from you. I reached into my purse, a real Hermes because I could afford authenticity, and pulled out an envelope, the same cream-colored stationery my mother had used for important occasions. Inside, the deed to their house and a cashier's check. Cascade Holdings, the company that owns your mortgage. I acquired it 18 months ago, which means I've been your landlord for 1.5 years. I watched that sink in, watched them realize how many mortgage payments they'd sent to my empire. The house is yours now, free and clear, and there's $50,000 to help with the transition. Jessica's hands shook as she took the envelope. Why? Because Mom would have wanted you to have a home, I said, the words coming easier than I'd expected. She believed in kindness, even for people who didn't deserve it. Consider it her final gift, the one you couldn't steal. My father made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, something between grief and recognition. Sarah, the house is yours, I cut him off. But the memories in it are mine. Every Christmas morning with Mom, every piano lesson, every bedtime story before Jessica decided my childhood room looked better as her closet. Those are mine, and you can't renovation them away. I turned to Madison, who looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. There's a number on the check. If you ever want to build something real, not influence, not followers, but something that matters, call it. Chen Industries has an internship program. We take women who've been underestimated and teach them to build empires, even women who underestimated others. After everything? Madison's voice was tiny. You'd give me a chance? I'm not giving you anything, I clarified. I'm offering you the opportunity to earn something. There's a difference. One your mother never taught you. Jessica's face at that moment was a masterpiece. Offense warring with desperation, pride battling with the realization that her daughter's best chance at a future was through the stepdaughter she'd tried to erase. Are you coming back? My father asked. For holidays? For family? No. The word was clean, surgical. Family is what I built in that garage in Chinatown. Family is Mrs. Liu bringing dumplings at 2 a.m. Family is Priya and the 50 women who call themselves invisibles. Family is chosen, Dad, and you chose Jessica and Madison. That's fine, but choices have consequences, and one of them is that I get to choose too. I walked toward my car, my heels clicking, on concrete like a countdown to their new reality. Marcus had the door open, engine running, but I stopped at the threshold, remembering one last thing. Oh, and Jessica, the boutiques you lost? Chen Industries bought the leases. We're turning them into coding schools for underprivileged girls. We're calling it the Grace Mitchell Memorial Program. I finally smiled, small and sharp. Mom always wanted to teach, now she will. The last thing I saw in the side mirror was the three of them, standing under those unforgiving fluorescent lights, holding an envelope worth more than they'd ever given me and less than they'd taken. Marcus pulled into traffic, and I closed my eyes, feeling something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not satisfaction, not victory, just peace. Where to, Ms. Chen? He asked. The office, I said. I have an empire to run. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough, more than enough. It felt like everything. Grace isn't forgiveness. It's freedom from needing their apology. It's giving them exactly what they need to survive, while keeping everything you need to thrive. It's walking away, not because you have to, but because you can. And that choice, that's the most elegant exit of all. I still have the video Madison posted that Thanksgiving. She'd titled it, Family Drama at Dinner with Crying Laughing Emojis, thinking she'd captured the ultimate takedown of her pathetic half-sister. 27 seconds of my father pointing at the door, 14 seconds of Jessica's scalding commentary about paper plates and failure, 3 seconds of me walking away, shoulders straight, a slight smile playing at my lips that nobody noticed but the camera. She deleted it after the awards ceremony, but the internet never forgets. Sometimes I watch it late at night in my penthouse office, the city lights reflecting off my awards wall, each plaque a reminder that exile can be an invitation to build your own kingdom. The video has become my meditation, not for the pain that faded long ago, replaced by something harder and more useful. I watch it for the smile, that tiny knowing smile that said I had 94 million reasons to be grateful for their cruelty. You see, dignity isn't about the money. It never was. Last week, a young woman reached out through LinkedIn, 23 years old, kicked out of her family for choosing engineering over marriage. She'd seen my Forbes interview, the one where I mentioned the invisibles. "How do you stop wanting their approval?" she asked over coffee that she insisted on buying with her last $20. I told her about Mrs. Liu, who fled China with nothing but recipes and rage, building a restaurant empire one dumpling at a time. About Priya, whose parents still introduce her as our daughter who works with computers instead of our daughter who revolutionized predictive modeling. About the 57 women who've passed through Chen Industries, each one a story of transformation that started with abandonment. Their approval is a cage, I told her, watching her absorb the words like they were oxygen. Even if you get it, you'll spend your whole life maintaining it. But your own approval, that's architecture. You can build anything on that foundation. She's starting next month as a junior developer. Madison is too, actually. She lasted 3 days in the internship program before quitting, saying it was too hard and not aligned with her brand. But she came back 2 weeks later, Sean Chula her Instagram, and asked for another chance. This time without the entitlement. She works harder than anyone expected. Maybe hunger is hereditary. Maybe she finally understood that followers disappear, but skills compound. Or maybe she just got tired of being the kind of success that evaporates when the Wi-Fi goes down. My father sends birthday cards now. Always a month late, always with a check I never cash. I keep them in a drawer labeled Lessons in Time Management. Jessica sends LinkedIn requests from increasingly creative fake profiles. I archive them in a folder called Persistence Without Purpose. They kept the house, of course they did. But I heard from Aunt Patricia, sweet, gossipy Aunt Patricia, who still thinks family drama is better than Netflix, that they converted Jessica's closet back into a bedroom, that they eat dinners in the kitchen now instead of the formal dining room, that my father plays Mom's piano sometimes, badly, but with something that sounds like regret. I don't forgive them. Forgiveness suggests that what they did requires my emotional labor to resolve. Instead, I've done something more elegant. I've forgotten them, not their lessons. Those are carved into my code, literally and figuratively, but them as people who matter to my present tense. The universe, it seems, favors the forgotten. Chen Industries went public last month. The IPO valued us at $847 million. I rang the opening bell at the NYSE wearing my mother's pearls. The ones Jessica never found because I'd hidden them in a safety deposit box, paid for with tutoring money. The photos went viral, the invisible heiress who built a visible empire. But the moment that mattered wasn't the bell or the billions or the magazine covers. It was Mrs. Liu in the crowd, 83 years old, wearing her best dress and crying tears that tasted like pride. It was Priya's parents finally understanding that their daughter hadn't just worked with computers, she'd changed how the world moves its goods. It was receiving an email from that young engineer. I got my first patent approved. The cage is gone. Success is loud. It announces itself in acquisitions and algorithms, in market share and media coverage. But dignity? Dignity is quiet. It's rejecting a billion-dollar buyout offer because you'd rather build than sell. It's funding 100 scholarships in your mother's name without needing a press release. It's teaching your half-sister how to code, not because she deserves it, but because you're better than what they tried to make you. Last Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner in my apartment. Real china, not paper plates. 27 people around a table I bought with my first profit. Mrs. Liu made dumplings. Priya's mother brought samosas. We mixed traditions like we mixed our traumas, carefully, deliberately, creating something new from what tried to break us. Nobody asked about my family. These women knew that some stories end mid-sentence, and that's okay. Sometimes the best epilogue is the one you write in a different book entirely. At midnight, after everyone had gone home, I stood on my balcony and watched the city sleep. Somewhere out there, in a house I owned then gave away, 3 people were living with the echo of their choices. And somewhere else, in boardrooms and classrooms and garages, invisible women were writing code that would change the world. The paper plates, it turns out, were never the insult. The insult was thinking I'd eat off them forever, that I'd accept scraps disguised as dinner, neglect disguised as family, erasure disguised as love. They gave me exile. I built an empire. They gave me silence. I found my voice. They gave me nothing. I made it everything. The greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's construction. Building something so beautiful, so undeniable, that their rejection becomes your origin story, not your ending. They thought they were writing me, call me out of the family narrative. They were actually writing me into history. And that's an echo that never fades. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Every week on Refined Revenge, we share real stories of people who transformed their pain into power, their rejection into reinvention. Maybe you're sitting at your own table 27 right now. Maybe you're sleeping in your car with million-dollar dreams. Maybe you just got kicked out of Thanksgiving dinner and don't know that it's the best thing that ever happened to you. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, not because we need your validation, we're past that, but because you deserve to remember that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served at exactly the temperature that transforms coal into diamonds. And if you're still eating off paper plates while sitting on your own potential fortune, well, consider this. Your sign to start building your own table. New stories every Monday. Because Mondays are for people who turn their worst moments into their origin stories.